They let him take everything while I stood there with nothing but grief. I watched my older brother work the room after my father's funeral with the quiet efficiency of a man who had been waiting for an opportunity and recognized it when it arrived. He spoke to the lawyer in the hallway. He gathered documents from Dad's desk. He poured himself a drink from the cabinet he had not purchased and accepted condolences in the center of a house he had barely been present in for the last 5 years. I sat in the corner with my 7-year-old son Marcus, and I pressed my hands together in my lap and told myself this was grief, and that grief made people strange, and I should wait before drawing conclusions about the room around me. But I knew what I was watching. I had been watching it my entire life. My brother positioning himself at the center of whatever mattered, and everyone allowing it, and me existing in the margin of that arrangement with a patience I had mistaken for dignity. What none of them knew, what even I did not fully understand yet, was that my father had been building something for me since 1995. Quietly, patiently, exactly the way he did everything that truly mattered. My name is Olivia. I am 33 years old, and the word used to describe me most consistently throughout my life is responsible. Not brilliant, not driven, not the one most likely to succeed, just responsible. The one who shows up, follows through, and stays when staying is required. I am a single mother. Marcus is 7, and he has his grandfather's eyes and my stubbornness. And he is the reason I get out of bed on mornings when getting out of bed requires an argument with myself. His father left when Marcus was 2. Not dramatically, just incrementally, until his absence became the default state. I have been doing this alone since then. I work as an administrative coordinator at a healthcare company, which is a polished way of saying I manage multiple complicated things simultaneously for a salary that covers what we need and almost nothing more. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment with east-facing windows that make the mornings bearable and a kitchen table where Marcus does his homework while I make dinner. It is a small life, but it is mine, and I built it one careful decision at a time. My father understood that kind of building. He had been doing his own version of it, quietly, for 28 years without telling me. My father's name was Henry Reeves. He was a man of few dramatic gestures and many small, consistent ones, the kind of father who showed up rather than performing the showing up. He was a machinist for 30 years and then, after retirement, a man who spent his mornings with a coffee and a crossword puzzle in the same kitchen chair at the same hour regardless of the season. He and my mother divorced when Jason and I were young. Jason was 11, I was 7. My mother moved away. Dad stayed in the same house in the same neighborhood and raised us with a predictability I have only come to understand as an adult was its own form of love. I moved back to that neighborhood when Marcus was 3 and I needed stability. Dad and I had dinner together most Thursdays. I took him to his medical appointments. I knew the names of his doctor and pharmacist and the neighbor who looked in on him when I couldn't. I was present in the way that doesn't photograph well but matters at 4 in the morning when someone needs help. I was present in the way that Jason was not, for reasons Jason always had explanations for, and I had stopped expecting him to examine. Jason is 5 years older than me. He is the kind of person who fills a room, not negatively, just thoroughly. Loud without being aggressive, charming without being false, confident in a way others find reassuring. He sells commercial real estate and he is good at it because that work requires the ease with people that Jason has always had and I have always had to work for. Growing up, he was Dad's first contact for everything important. Decisions, announcements, Sunday drives to look at places they might do something with eventually. I was the one who cleaned up after the Sunday drives and made sure there was food for the week. I did not resent this exactly. I had learned to see it clearly. There is a difference between resentment and clarity, and I had spent a long time reaching the latter. Jason got the visibility. I got the proximity. And somewhere in the math between those two things, my father and I had built something I had not fully recognized until the afternoon the lawyer opened a different file and the room went quiet. That afternoon would rearrange everything I thought I understood about my father's intentions, my brother's assumptions, and the specific patient form that love had taken in our family. Dad died on a Wednesday in October. He had been in declining health for 2 years. Nothing sudden, just the slow accumulation of age on a body that had worked hard for a long time. I had been present for most of it. I managed the medication schedule, the dietary adjustments, the conversations with a specialist about what the next stage would involve. I sat with him on 3 different Thursdays that final month when he was too tired to talk, and we simply existed in the same room together with the television low, which was its own kind of conversation. Jason called regularly and visited twice in those final 2 months. I did not say this to make him a villain. He had a business and 2 young daughters who required his time. I said it because it was accurate. When Dad passed, I was the one called at 4 in the morning. I drove to the hospital. I sat with him in the last hour. I called Jason afterward, and his voice when he answered told me he had been asleep, which was appropriate. There is nothing wrong with being asleep when the call comes. I just happened to be the one who was already awake. The funeral was on a Saturday. It was a gray October day, appropriate without being theatrical, and the church was fuller than I expected, which told me something about the quiet impression Dad had made on people across 30 years of consistent, unremarkable decency. I gave a small speech I had written Thursday night with Marcus asleep in the next room and a glass of water going warm on the desk beside me. It was not eloquent. It was accurate, which was what I aimed for. Jason spoke too, and his speech was better than mine. He had a way of finding the right shape for things, the turn of phrase that made people nod. I did not begrudge him this. After the service, family came back to Dad's house. I had organized the food. I had coordinated the flowers. I had cleaned and prepared the space the day before while Marcus played quietly in the back room with a tablet I had charged specifically for this purpose. I had done all the things that needed doing, the way I had always done all the things that needed doing, and I had been mostly invisible in the doing of them. That was also not new. In the hours after the funeral, the house felt like a place where multiple conversations were happening on multiple levels at once. On the surface, people ate and shared memories and said the gentle, repetitive things that people say at these gatherings. Underneath, other things were happening. I could feel Jason orienting toward practical questions. The house, the accounts, the decisions to be made. He cornered Theodore Marsh, the lawyer, in the hallway twice. I watched from the kitchen while keeping the food organized and making sure Marcus had enough to eat. Relatives filtered through with the careful warmth of people who were genuinely sorry but also aware something was being decided and were positioning themselves accordingly. An aunt made a comment about how Jason had always been so capable. An uncle said he had always assumed Jason would be the one to handle things. These were not malicious observations, just the product of a lifetime of impressions shaped by what was visible, which had always been Jason. I existed in the gap between what was visible and what was real, and I had lived there long enough it no longer surprised me. But that afternoon, something in me was paying a different kind of attention than usual. Theodore Marsh called everyone into the living room at 6 in the evening. It was the formal moment the day had been building toward. The reading of the will, the laying out of what Dad had decided and what that would mean for everyone who remained. The room arranged itself with the self-consciousness of people who know something important is about to be said. Marcus sat beside me on the couch, his small shoulder pressed against my arm. He didn't understand the full weight of the moment, but children sense atmosphere, and his quietness told me he had felt the room change. Theodore Marsh was a careful man, mid-50s, precise with his language, the kind whose whole professional life had been organized around saying difficult things in rooms like this one. He opened his briefcase with unhurried manner. He thanked everyone for their patience. He said he would go through the document in order, and that questions should be held until he finished. The room listened with the attentiveness of people who understand what comes next is going to matter. I placed my hand on Marcus's knee and felt him lean into me. I breathed steadily and waited for what I suspected was coming. Jason was named the primary beneficiary. The house, the same house we had grown up in, the same kitchen with the same chair where Dad had done his crossword puzzles for decades, would transfer to Jason. The primary savings account would go to Jason. Car. The tools in the garage Dad had accumulated over 30 years of working with his hands. One by one, the visible things constituting my father's material life were assigned to my brother. A murmur moved through the room. Not quite surprise, more like confirmation of what people had assumed was likely. Jason kept his expression neutral, but I saw in the slight lift of his shoulders something that might have been relief or satisfaction, and the difference between those two things said something I wasn't ready to examine directly. I was named as a secondary beneficiary for a few smaller items, some personal effects, a piece of jewelry that had been our mother's. I nodded when my name was read. I did not react visibly. I had spent a long time becoming very good at that, and the skill served me now the way developed skills do. Automatically, as reflex rather than decision. Jason made his comment after the primary reading finished. He said it with the ease of someone who doesn't realize the room has a longer memory than the moment. He said something about carrying the family forward, about responsibility, about stepping up when it mattered. Someone at the edge of the room made a quiet joke about how I had chosen a different path, meaning Marcus, meaning the choices I had made, meaning the life I had built entirely alone on a single income in a 2-bedroom apartment. A few people laughed, not cruelly, not consciously, just in the automatic way people laugh when a social cue says laughter is appropriate. I sat with my hands in my lap and looked at the floor for a moment, then looked at Marcus, who was watching me with an expression containing a question he was too young and too kind to ask directly. I gave him the smallest nod that said everything is fine, even though I wasn't certain that was true. The room had already moved on. Theodore Marsh was gathering his papers. People were beginning to stand. Felt like an ending. Turned out it was not. Theodore Marsh cleared his throat. He did it in the precise, deliberate way of a man who has done this before. The sound that says I have not finished, that something still needs to be said. The room, in the process of dissolving into smaller conversations, reassembled its attention. Jason looked over with the mild irritation of someone who considers the main event concluded and doesn't want an encore complicating the narrative. Theodore Marsh said there was one more item. He said it was a separate document, unconnected to the will itself. He said it had different legal standing and different implications. He opened a second file from his briefcase, one I had not seen him open before, one that felt different in character from the first. The room went quiet again. Not the polite quiet of people being patient, but the sharp quiet of people who understand something they didn't anticipate is about to enter a situation they thought they understood. Marcus looked up at me. I looked at Theodore Marsh. He had found his place in the document and was reading, and the care with which he read told me that what he was about to say mattered in a specific and possibly considerable way. Theodore Marsh looked up from the document and spoke with the measured tone of a professional who delivers significant information without editorial. He said that in 1995 my father had opened an investment account. He said the account was registered in a single name, mine. He said my father had made consistent contributions to this account over nearly 3 decades, and the account had grown considerably through those contributions and the performance of the underlying investments. He said the account was not subject to probate and did not pass through the will. He said it had been structured specifically to transfer to me, automatically, upon my father's death. He paused. Then he gave the figure. The room was silent in a way that felt completely different from all the silences that had come before it that evening. Not the silence of grief or formality, the silence of a room that has received information requiring it to recalibrate something it thought it understood. I heard the number. I looked at Theodore Marsh. He looked back at me with the steady expression of a man who had seen rooms like this before. Marcus's hand found mine quietly under the table. Jason spoke first. He asked in the careful tone of someone trying to establish whether something is a mistake before deciding how to respond to it as fact. He asked when the account had been opened. Theodore Marsh said 1995. He asked who had managed it. Theodore Marsh said my father had worked with a financial advisor whose name was on file, and that the account had been structured conservatively and consistently for nearly 30 years. Jason asked if it could be contested. Theodore Marsh looked at him steadily and said the account had been established properly, was registered in my name, and was not a probate asset. He said the documentation was complete and clear. He said there was no mechanism within the will or outside of it that would alter the account's designation. Jason sat back. The relatives who had nodded along with the will reading were now rearranging their expressions with the effort of people who need to recalibrate without appearing to do so. I sat very still. I was 33 years old, and my father had been building something for me since I was 5. The mathematics of that arranged itself in my mind into a shape I could not immediately name. I thought about 1995. I was 5 years old in 1995. I did not have fully formed memories yet. Just impressions of the kitchen, the crossword puzzle, my father's voice from the next room. Jason would have been 10, already the older one, already taken on the Sunday drives. My father had sat down at some point that year and opened an investment account and put my name on it. Not Jason's name. He had done this when I was 5 years old and could not have understood what it meant, and he had never said a word. Not to me, not to anyone in this room. I tried to imagine what it took to maintain that silence for 28 years. To keep building the account. To watch me grow up, struggle as a single mother, manage everything alone, and say nothing. Not because he was indifferent. Because he had already done the thing. He had already made the provision. He trusted it to speak for itself when the time came. That was the most my father thing I could imagine. He had always expressed the most important things through what he did rather than what he said. He had simply done it on a longer timeline than I had known. The room had a different quality now than it had an hour earlier. People who had been comfortable in their assumptions were navigating the specific discomfort of having been wrong in a room full of witnesses. The aunt who had commented on Jason's capability was very interested in her tea. The uncle who had assumed Jason would handle things was engaged in a detailed study of the carpet. Jason himself had composed his face into deliberate neutrality, doing the careful work of containing whatever was actually happening underneath it. He was not a man who had expected this. He had walked into this room with a very clear picture of what the afternoon would produce, and the picture had changed in a way he could not have anticipated. I understood what he was feeling because I had spent most of my life in the adjacent position, being the one whose picture didn't match the room. It was not a pleasant feeling. I did not enjoy watching him have it. But I did not intervene to soften it either, because it was not my responsibility to manage his relationship with a truth my father had made. That was his to sit with. This was mine. Theodore Marsh finished his explanation, closed the second file, and placed it carefully back in his briefcase alongside the first. He said he had complete copies of everything available for me, and that I should contact his office at my convenience to review the full documentation and next steps. He said it with the professional completeness of a man who had finished exactly what he came to do. Thanked him. I said it simply, without elaboration, because elaboration was not what the moment required. I gathered my bag from beside the couch. I helped Marcus into his jacket, which had one broken snap at the top that I kept meaning to fix and had not yet fixed. I put my hand on his shoulder and looked at the room once, not to make a statement, not to examine anyone's expression, just to see it one more time. The house where Dad had done his crossword puzzle in the same chair for 30 years. The room where Jason had just learned something that recalibrated everything he thought he knew. Theodore Marsh nodded at me. I nodded back. I took Marcus's hand and we walked toward the front door together, and the room behind us was very quiet. Marcus asked me in the car what had happened. He asked in the direct, patient way he approached things he knew were significant. Without pressure, just asking because he wanted to understand. I told him his grandfather had saved some money for us, and that we had found out about it today. He thought for a moment. Then he asked if it was a lot. I told him it was enough. He nodded, apparently satisfied, and looked out the window at the passing streetlights. After a while he said, "Grandpa was good at keeping things." I asked what he meant. He said that Grandpa never talked much but always knew things. I told him that was exactly right. He went back to the streetlights. I drove home through the city my father had lived in his whole adult life, thinking about the account growing quietly since 1995 with my name on it, trying to locate the feeling sitting in the center of my chest. It was not triumph. It was not vindication. It was something older and quieter than either, something that felt more than anything like being held. The specific sensation of understanding you have been seen by someone who mattered. The calls started the next morning. My aunt called first, the one so interested in her tea the previous evening. She said she was just checking in, and her voice carried the particular texture of someone who wants to address something without quite naming it. I told her I was fine and thanked her for coming. She said Dad had always been private about his finances. She said she had always known how close we were. I thanked her and said I needed to get Marcus ready for school. My cousin called in the afternoon, then another relative I hadn't spoken to in 2 years. Each call had the same shape: inquiry dressed as concern, recalibration wearing the clothes of condolence. I received all of them with the same polite steadiness I brought to difficult things. By the end of the day I had a picture of how the story was moving through the family, not quickly or dramatically, but person to person through the shared channels of family information, accumulating detail and commentary as it traveled. I did not add to it. I let it travel without my assistance. My father had made his statement. I did not need to provide footnotes. Jason called on day 3. I had been expecting it and was uncertain how to feel, not because I feared the conversation, but because I didn't know which version of Jason was calling. The angry version, the hurt version, or the calculating one. It turned out to be a combination of the second and third, which was the version I knew best. He said he hadn't known. He said it with a directness that told me he believed this was the most relevant fact in the situation. I said I hadn't known either, which was true. He was quiet. Then he said Dad could have mentioned it. I said Dad had mentioned it in the way that mattered. He had put it in writing with a lawyer 30 years ago. Jason was quiet again. Then he said he wasn't going to fight it. I told him I knew. He said he hoped we could still, and then he paused, searching for the word. I said, I know, Jason. He said okay. Said okay. We said goodbye. The conversation had been shorter and more honest than most of our conversations over the past decade, which I took as a small, specific form of progress. I met with Theodore Marsh the following week. He walked me through the documentation carefully. The account history, the contribution records, the current valuation, the transfer process. He showed me the original paperwork from 1995, which had my father's signature in the handwriting I recognized from birthday cards and grocery lists and the crossword puzzle books he had filled over the years. My full name written out carefully. My father's signature. A date in early spring of 1995. Theodore Marsh explained that my father had worked with a financial advisor who had structured the account conservatively, a mix of stable instruments that had grown without dramatic volatility over nearly 3 decades. My father had reviewed the account annually and made adjustments periodically, which the records documented clearly. He said all of this had been conducted with the ordinary care of someone who understood exactly what they were doing. I sat across from Theodore Marsh in his office and thought about my father reviewing this account every single year for 28 years without saying a word to me. I thought about him at the doctor's office, in the crossword puzzle chair, at our Thursday dinners. He had been carrying this knowledge the whole time, and chose to carry it alone. I did not spend the money immediately. There was no relief spending, no impulse purchase, no sudden lifting of the carefulness I had practiced for years. The account existed. The fact of it changed things without requiring me to change anything right away. What had changed first was the quality of the space I moved through. The specific anxiety of a single mother managing on a tight budget that had been the background frequency of my daily life for years simply shifted. Not because the money was already spent, but because it was there. The particular kind of tiredness that comes from knowing there is no margin, from understanding that any unexpected expense requires a calculation and a sacrifice somewhere else, had a different quality now. It was still present, because I had not yet done anything with the account. But it had a door in it. A door I knew existed, even if I hadn't opened it yet. I went to work. I made Marcus's lunches. I sat at the kitchen table in the evenings while he did homework and I made dinner. The east-facing windows made the mornings bearable. Everything looked the same from the outside. I felt, underneath everything, a different kind of steady. Marcus asked about his grandfather again on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after the funeral, The night that would have been our usual dinner with Dad. We made pasta together, which was his current favorite activity for reasons I had stopped trying to analyze and simply supported. He was stirring the sauce with great focus and said without looking up, "Did Grandpa know you would need it?" I asked what he meant. He said, "The money. Did he know you'd need it someday?" I thought about my father in the spring of 1995, opening an account with my 5-year-old name on it. I thought about what he could not have predicted. The divorce, the single parenthood, the 2-bedroom apartment, the tight budgets, the Thursday dinners we would eventually share. He could not have known any of it specifically. But he had known something. He had known me well enough and trusted that knowledge enough to build something that would be there if needed. I told Marcus that Grandpa had understood that everyone needs something sometimes, and that he had wanted to make sure I had it. Marcus considered this. Then he said, "That's a good Grandpa thing to do." It was, I told him. It really was. 6 months after the funeral, I used a portion of the account to make 2 decisions I had been unable to make before. The first was to move Marcus to a school I had wanted him to attend for 2 years but couldn't afford, one with a strong science program that matched the curiosity he had developed about how things worked, a curiosity that reminded me of my father more than I had expected. The second was to pay off the remaining balance of a debt I had been managing carefully for 4 years, the one that had sat at the back of every financial calculation I made like a persistent low-grade headache. I did both of these things quietly, without announcement. I did not tell Jason. I did not tell the relatives who had been calling to check in. I did not post anything, share anything, or make the decisions into a statement about anything other than what they actually were. A mother making choices for her child with resources given by a father who had trusted her to use them well. This was what Dad had expected of me. Not a performance. Just the work. He had always known I was the one who did the work without requiring it to be witnessed. A year after the funeral, I sat in the kitchen on a Thursday evening while Marcus did his homework and thought about my father. Grief had settled into something different by then. Something that lived alongside the ordinary days rather than interrupting them. I thought about the 1995 version of him. The man who had gone to a financial advisor's office and opened an account and written my name on it. My mother had already left. Jason had already become the charismatic older one. I was 5 and did not know what an investment account was. Dad had known something about me that I had not yet figured out about myself. That I was the one who would stay, show up, carry things quietly without requiring recognition. He had known it before I could possibly have demonstrated it. He had loved me the way he loved crossword puzzles and kitchen chairs and Thursday dinners. Without announcement, without performance, with the patient certainty of someone who understood the best things take time. I sat with my tea going cold and Marcus's pencil moving on paper and the October windows dark outside, and felt, for the first time since the funeral, that I understood something fully. My father saw me all along. That is the thing I carry now, underneath everything else. The school runs, the budget slightly less tight than before. The Thursday evenings that belong to Marcus and me now instead of to Dad and me but carry the same steadiness. He saw me in the ordinary way of someone paying careful attention to the right things. Not the visible things. Not the Sunday drives or the charismatic speeches. The actual things. The showing up. The managing. The unglamorous, essential work of being present for someone who needed you. He saw all of it and said nothing because saying it would have changed the nature of it. He understood that some things are only real when they are quiet. The account in my name, growing for 28 years without my knowledge, was the quietest thing he ever said to me. And it said everything. I am 33 years old. My son is 8 now and asks questions about mechanical things I cannot always answer. I have east-facing windows and a kitchen table and Thursdays that belong to us. I have more than I did a year ago in every way that matters. And I have the knowledge, finally and completely, that I was never invisible to him. Not once.